Protests against election rigging in Belarus have not only taken place in Minsk. Towns and cities across the country have seen people taking to the streets. These images are from Hrodna, a city of 370,000 people near the Polish border, on August the 30th. Like elsewhere in the country that day, riot police were out in force, but did not deter the crowds. Throughout the turmoil, Hrodna has been a microcosm of events nationwide. These were the scenes on August the 9th, after exit polls said President Alexander Lukashenka had been re-elected with some 80% of the vote. Protesters said the result had been fixed. Riot police responded with stun grenades and tear gas. The following day, the protests and suppression continued. On August the 11th, employees at the Hrodna Azot chemical works, one of the biggest plants in Belarus, voiced support for the protests. That night, as the suppression of demonstrations continued, an armoured vehicle crashed into a car, injuring a 5-year-old girl.
Было страшно, когда достаешь ребенка всего в крови. Ребенок кричит: «Мама, я не хочу умирать». Вот это было страшно.
On August the 12th, Hrodna was part of a nationwide women's protest. Workers at the chemical plant went on strike and were joined by other Hrodna factories. The following day, their bosses tried to persuade them to return to work, but many workers had supported opposition candidate Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya.
Посмотрите, кто встал за Тихановскую, посмотрите, сколько людей стало.
On August the 14th, thousands of people joined a mass rally where they unfurled a huge red and white flag, which has become a symbol of protest against Lukashenka's rule. The demands included the release of the thousands of people arrested at previous demonstrations nationwide, and that Lukashenka step down. As the gatherings continued to grow, the tide seemed to be turning in the protesters' favour. This video is from the local state TV network, which broadcast live coverage of the rally on August the 17th. City councillors apologised to the crowd for police brutality and read out protesters' demands, which they said were now being implemented.
Гарантировать свободу мирных собраний граждан прежде всего через внесение изменений в решение городского совета об определении мест проведения массовых мероприятий.
All of the arrested protesters were released from Hrodna's detention centres, and police also apologised. Workers were promised they would not be punished for going on strike. But the main demand for Lukashenka to go was not met.
Дорогие друзья,
on the contrary, he came to Hrodna on August the 22nd to rally his supporters.
Представьте на минуту, что нет этого Лукашенко. Вы понимаете, кто сегодня бы командовал войсками на западной границе?
The next day, August the 23rd, Lukashenka visited the Hrodna military base and told the troops to be ready to defend the area from possible attack. He had earlier claimed that NATO was massing forces on the country's borders, a claim the alliance dismissed. When Lukashenka returned to Minsk, these now notorious pictures of him toting a firearm were released. The Defence Ministry warned that the army might be deployed against protesters. All this occurred the same day as a huge anti-Lukashenka protest in Minsk and similar large protests in Hrodna and other cities, at which security forces kept their distance. On August the 25th, the police arrested some 20 striking workers at Hrodna Azot. Later, the authorities let them go after protesters gathered demanding their release. But the leader of the strike committee fled to Warsaw, from where he sent a video message saying he'd been harassed and intimidated.
Те люди, которые будут выступать за то, что да, нам надо продолжать деятельность этого стачечного комитета, боюсь, что они самые первые, которые начнут попадать под этот пресс.
By this time, Lukashenko had replaced the regional governor with this man, former health minister Vladimir Karanyik. On August the 27th, he visited Hrodna Azot and told the workers that political demands could only be made by political parties, not by the street and not by strike committees. He added that people would be detained if they attended unauthorized rallies. Meanwhile, Lukashenko made the claim that Poland was seeking to seize control of the Hrodna region.
Вы видите эти заявления о том, что Беларусь распадется, Гродненская область уже отойдет к Польше. Они уже в открытую об этом говорят.
On August the 30th, there were again nationwide mass protests, and some 10,000 people took to the streets in Hrodna. Security officials told them to disperse, but were largely ignored. RFERL has confirmed the identity of 7 people known to have been detained. As elsewhere in Belarus, in Hrodna, the authorities have hit back at protesters, but have failed so far to deny them the streets.